This podcast is brought to you by sarahraven.com, which is home to everything you need for a truly beautiful and productive garden. You'll also find great and essential gardening kit and stylish, lovely things to have in your house to bring the outside indoors, all inspired by the garden and the house being tied together. There's also plenty of garden inspiration, how-to videos and specialist growing guides. So head over to sarahraven.com today to discover even more.
Welcome to Grow Cook Eat Arrange with me, Arthur Parkinson. This week Sarah is off, but I'm delighted to be interviewing someone who I met a few years ago at that weird time when it was just coming out of COVID, and I met the lovely Carolyn Dunster at the Hay Literature Festival, and I don't think me or Carolyn really knew what was going on because Sarah appeared behind us on this huge screen like God, and it was at that awful time where it wasn't a proper audience. Everyone had to be sat kind of 2 seats apart, so it was all quite odd, but it was lovely because I was interviewing her about one of her floral passions, which is dried flowers, and she's written a beautiful book called About Dried Flowers, and also before that she wrote one about urban flowers, because like me, Carolyn has got quite a small urban garden that is full of plants. But her latest book is called A Floral Feast, and what I love about this is she's skipped doing a cookbook and she's really focused on celebrating the edible flower, which, working for Sarah, I've known a little bit over the years, but this book really highlights the abundance and versatility of eating flowers. So welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you.
It's a beautiful book to get, and I love the fact that on the cover there's a wonderful plate bursting like a trifle of flowers with dahlias and marigolds and violas that a lot of people might be familiar with as eating flowers. But you've really collected the world of edible flowers in your book, and I suppose my first question is why edible flowers, and why was it now that you decided to celebrate them?
Well, it's now because I think the time has come. This book has actually taken me about 10 years to get off the ground. It was the very first book idea I ever had, and I pitched and pitched and pitched, and nobody was interested because they said it was too niche and people wouldn't want to be eating flowers. And then as a result of 2 other books, I managed to get a publisher for this. I think in urban flowers, I had a rewards section, which is basically what you can do, all the things that you can do with the lovely flowers that you've grown in your garden. And I did touch on edible flowers there, but only a couple of very obvious ones. This time round, I think people are much more aware of probably wanting to make their food look beautiful. There is that. And now everyone's posting pictures of what they eat in restaurants. I think people have woken up to the fact that, flowers are edible. And there seems to be a real trend at the moment for decorating, particularly wedding cakes, but any sort of celebration cakes with fresh flowers. Sometimes I'm a bit shocked to see that there are all sorts of flowers on the cakes which aren't actually edible. So I just think what I really wanted to do was research all the flowers that are edible and not going to do you any harm. I also include a list of flowers that are definitely toxic and should never go anywhere near food.
Well done.
And in doing that, I just came across lots of varieties that, frankly, I didn't even really know were edible until I started doing my research. So it's been quite a journey and quite a learning curve for me.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting when we were doing Chelsea Flower Show this year. We'd finish the show very late, and the only place that was open on the way home was a London branch of Marks and Sparks. And in the salad section, there were packets of violas for sale. So it's now become very on trend, hasn't it?
It's becoming a thing, isn't it? I noticed they are Marks and Spencer's, aren't they? So they've started doing, but I work in the kitchen garden at Chiswick House, and we have a big edible flower plot there, which I've actually helped design. And we are now supplying a number of London restaurants with edible flowers, and we also sell edible flowers on the gate. So I think it's definitely something that people are beginning to tune into.
Yeah. And what edible flowers are the London restaurants requesting that they buy from
Well,
you?
the main ones we're growing for them are nasturtiums, cornflowers, anything quite brightly coloured that looks really pretty on a plate. I think they're mainly using them still as decoration and garnishes rather than actually concocting a whole dish from them. But roses, borage, French marigolds, as you said before, the heartsease, the violas, all sorts really. We're trying to grow some varieties that aren't so well known, like snapdragons.
Oh, you can eat snapdragons.
And dianthus, yes. Yeah. I mean, they don't have a great deal of flavour. They just look really pretty.
Yes.
They're quite bland. And I suppose that is a point in a way that some flowers are edible and they look really lovely, but they don't have a great deal of flavour. Other flowers, you're kind of looking at the ones that have a quite an intense perfume anyway, like lavender and roses. So they're the ones that do lend themselves to being turned into syrups and cordials and that kind of thing.
I mean, you say this book took 10 years, so the idea of eating flowers must be quite deep in your heart. When was the first time you ate a flower in your life?
Well, I spent quite a lot of time in France when I was younger. Around about, actually, when I say I was younger, it was about the same time that I started my first floristry business, which was called Simply Roses. This is about 20 years ago now. And I noticed in France that they were using lots of rose-flavoured syrups, and you could buy rose chocolate. And roses were my first sort of introduction to the whole idea of eating flowers. And I think, having researched it a lot more, I mean, people have been eating roses for millennia. The Romans used to eat roses. They were grown as a food condiment.
Yeah, because of course rosehip syrup is one of the best vitamin C things on earth, isn't it? Even I know that, and I'm not a cook at all. I mean, just flicking through the book, there's so many flowers that we go by every day that are edible. I mean, I didn't know until I looked through your book that you could eat jasmine, and I feel like such a fool not knowing that, but of course you can. And you've done a wonderful recipe with lots of jasmine flowers, a jasmine noodle salad, which looks absolutely beautiful. I mean, it looks like something at the River Cafe.
It has a slightly musky taste to it, but it is delicious. And I think that's the thing. Sort of anything that's scented and edible is going to have a flavour, and then you can use it as a sort of single ingredient. Yeah. Other flowers that don't really have a scent are probably never going to have much of a flavour, but you might use them in a salad or as a decoration. Yeah. So there is a slight, there's a sort of distinction between flavour and what just looks really pretty.
I mean, I really am admiring, just looking through the book as I'm talking to you, the amount of recipes you've done. I mean, you must have spent a long time doing lots of recipes and researching and, doing calendula risotto just to find out how much flour each recipe needs to have a good taste. Was that a long process, or are you quite a natural at knowing the amounts?
Well, in that section, which is basically 10 flowers that I've been growing in my garden for a really long time, and they're all flowers that are pretty easy to grow as well. I kind of just thought about how would I eat these flowers, and substituted, for example, the calendula. I would normally make a saffron risotto. But I knew that the calendula, you could grind down the dried petals and make a powder, and it colours the rice in exactly the same way as saffron does. But I mean, if you're growing calendulas yourself, it's cost nothing compared to using saffron. So I just wanted to, in a way, and in fact, when my daughter saw the book, she said, "Oh, but Mummy, it's just the recipes that you always make at home anyway, that you've just put flowers in them." So I didn't want to do a really, I'm not a professional chef. I didn't want to do a really complicated cookbook. I just wanted to show how you can swap out, say, fruit and use flowers instead on a pavlova. It's just about giving people ideas of how you can use them and whether they kind of lend themselves to a sweet dish or a savoury dish.
Yeah, I mean, what I love are the syrups, and that's something I'm definitely going to try and do this summer, because you've done lots of floral syrups which look absolutely beautiful.
Yeah, I've just been making a lavender one this morning, actually, because my lavender's just literally at the right point. Yeah.
So that's the kind of, I mean, that's such a lovely thing, isn't it, to do maybe on bulk and then give away at Christmas and that kind of thing.
Exactly.
And so different. I mean, you'd have to go to a really posh delicatessen in London, wouldn't you, to get that kind of thing?
Yeah, and it's not that easy to find anyway. Even I think, and that's the other thing about growing edible flowers yourself. So you do have to be really careful not to use flowers that you've bought from a flower shop, because you don't want anything that's been sprayed or treated with chemicals in any way. And I think the only way you can be sure that that hasn't happened is by growing them yourself. But I think the thing about making the syrups and the sugars and the jams and that sort of thing is that it's a really lovely way of bottling your garden.
Yeah.
So that, you can make a cake on a dark February afternoon and sandwich the 2 layers with some rose jam that you might have made the previous summer. And it just gives you that lovely feeling of, this has come from my garden. This is, the smell and the taste of the roses, it's all here, and it's going to brighten up my miserable February day.
Yeah. So, I mean, you have got a small garden. So tell us about your garden and how you've made it both beautiful and productive.
Well, I've purposely grown lots of flowers that I know that you can eat. I don't have a designated edible flower plot because I don't have the space. So I'm basically sort of growing everything. Is all intermingled. But, I've got lots of salvias and calendula, nasturtiums, all growing in with flowers that I might just use for cutting and drying. But these ones I'm going to be harvesting to eat instead. So it is a little bit of a jumble. I mean, everything's, kind of growing in together, but I actually really like it like that. It's not dissimilar to your style of gardening either.
And we're chatting on quite a dull day, but do you like to go in the garden and relax, or is it a workspace for you? Is it somewhere that you go and write? Is it just a sanctuary of flowers and somewhere that you look at?
I wish I could relax a little bit more in it, but it's mainly, I suppose, because it's where I've done all my experimenting and researching for my books. It has really become my workspace, and I find it quite difficult just to sit. I don't tend to write outside because I get too distracted. Yeah. But I mean, it's really where I've got all my ideas from.
So have you got a potting shed, or is your potting shed and then you've got an office inside that you do the writing at?
Yeah, I have a shed, which at this time of the year is fine for drying stuff. And that's something, again, that, because I wrote a book about how to grow flowers for drying, the next stage on for me was really drying out the edible flower petals and using those, preserving them and using those in food as well. So I have, explained in the book
about air drying, isn't it?
You can do that. I don't necessarily hang them up to dry. I actually strip the petals off. So in most cases, you're not really going to eat the whole flower head. For the calendula, for example, you actually have to remove the petals away from the main flower head. And then I just spread them all out on a tray. And at this time of the year, you can actually leave them to sort of dry naturally in a warm, dry space. So I do use my shed for that at this time of year, but it does get quite damp.
Yes.
In the winter, so then I have to bring everything inside.
And at what point do you then start to jam jar things up when things are really crispy and properly dry?
Yeah, once they're properly dry, you can then put them in a jar, and they'll keep, as long as you keep them out of direct sunlight, so they don't fade. I mean, they'll keep for probably about a year at least.
That's the calendula.
Well, the calendula, any sort of brightly coloured petals like the cornflowers, calendula, dianthus, they all keep their colour really well, and they just go a bit crispy. I mean, I wouldn't say that they have a huge amount of flavour, but you can use them to decorate cookies and cakes and desserts and that kind of thing, and they just look really pretty. It's like a sort of floral confetti, edible floral confetti.
And I think in the summer and even the autumn you take that for granted, but once we hit February, you're probably really, really glad of having those in your larder, aren't you, to just give you that
it's
hope.
Lovely. Yeah, exactly.
And of course you mentioned a lot of Sarah's favourite edible flowers. You've got dahlias, but I'd forgotten really that you could eat carnations. They're
Yes.
kind of the forgotten. I think they're due a big revival because they're so beautifully scented, aren't they?
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, I love that. It's kind of like a sweet, spicy flavour that you don't really get from anything else.
Yeah, so good for perfume, but also for eating. And then you go, I've mentioned the jasmine, but I didn't know hibiscus were edible. I mean,
Yes.
but do you grow hibiscus in your garden?
Well, sadly, I don't grow it myself. My next door neighbour had the most amazing hibiscus plants, but that's now been taken out. But that was my source of hibiscus.
Yeah.
Actually, hibiscus are one of the flowers that you can buy dried quite easily from sort of specialist supermarkets and food shops. There's a great place near me in Kentish Town that sells dried hibiscus flowers. So, I mean, it is one of the ones that actually you can probably cheat on because they're grown and dried for eating. You can make the most amazing hibiscus juice from dried hibiscus flowers.
Yeah, you use it for poached pears, don't you? Hibiscus.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's
that sounds
delicious.
absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, if you want to come down with me and you serve that, that'd be quite amazing, wouldn't it? I mean, yeah, London. I suppose if you are in London, you do have the luxury of growing, but also having amazing shops and markets that sell it too. But I suppose it is far more rewarding to grow as much as you can, of course.
Yes, exactly.
So going back to the book, and you doing endless recipes and trying to get it sold to a publisher, which I know is just so hard and stressful. When you finally got the deal, is that when the photos started for these recipes? Because having worked with Sarah, I know how you're waiting to get that deal, and then suddenly you've got the deal, you've got a deadline, so you have to have days of endless cooking. I mean, I've only worked with Sarah on one of her cookbooks quite briefly, and I just remember Sarah was having to do recipe after recipe for Jonathan to photograph, and I don't think people realise how intense cookbooks actually are.
Yeah, we did all our photography in 2 days.
Wow.
So we picked a day. I think we picked a day probably in June with the early flowers, and then the middle of August for the later ones. And I mean, obviously I did a lot of the prep beforehand. We shot it all in one of the top rooms in my house. So there was a lot of going up and down the stairs with everything. But I worked with the most amazing photographer who I had actually worked with before, and I knew she'd do a wonderful job, Joanna Yee. So I just, her style, I knew she'd make everything look really wonderful. And she brought in so many lovely props. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot more to it than because this is the first cookery book I've ever done. I mean, obviously I've done my other books, which involved a lot of styling, but food's a whole new ball game, actually.
Do you think you'll do another one?
I don't know. I have. Yeah, I really enjoyed writing out the recipes, which I didn't necessarily expect to. And, with all the weighing and everything, again, that's all, you have to be really accurate. And I had to go and buy a whole load of cups because they wanted all the measurements to be in American as well as English. And in America, everything's weighed out in cups, which was a whole new thing to me as well. I didn't really understand that before I started, that a cup of sugar is not the same as a cup of flour, for example.
Oh, no.
So I had to get my head around that.
You mentioned beloved pelargoniums. Have you got lots of pelargoniums in your pots this summer?
This summer, I haven't actually got that many. Unfortunately, even though I give quite detailed instructions of how to keep them alive during the winter, I didn't manage to keep my own alive.
Oh.
I'm not sure what happened, but a lot of them died. Oh. But I mean, I think pelargoniums. So, for example, if you don't even have a garden, but you fancy cooking with flowers, you can just keep them as a pot plant anyway on your windowsill. Yeah. So, I mean, they're a great one to have indoors.
Yeah, they're fantastic. I mean, I do love the cordial. I think have you got a recipe for cordial, or is it the syrup that you do?
Well, I put recipes for cordials and syrups. So, I mean, basically the main ingredients are the same, but you use different flour. Well, with pelargoniums, actually, I use the leaves rather than the flowers. So, it's not difficult to do.
And the nasturtiums, they play a wonderful part in the book. There's gorgeous photos of them stuffed.
I think you can stuff them with all sorts. Yeah. So I stuffed them with cream cheese in the book, but you can put anything into a nasturtium. I think Nasturtiums are a great entry plant for eating. They're really easy to grow as well, but you can eat every single part of the flower, which is what makes them quite useful. So you can eat the whole flower head. You don't need to go around pulling the petals off. You can eat the foliage, which tastes really delicious. It's got quite peppery, so you could just a peppery taste. So you could actually just have a nasturtium leaf salad. And then the other thing you can do is once the flowers have gone over and they started to form seed heads, is that you can actually eat those as well. Wow. You need to put them in vinegar, and they're called poor man's capers.
Oh,
yeah,
okay,
yeah.
I mean, I just love at the back of the book how you've collected all the... I mean, I didn't know you could eat fuchsias. I didn't know you could eat freesias. Forsythia you can eat.
Yeah, there's masses, aren't there?
I mean, and daylilies. I mean, what on earth would you do with a daylily? I don't know, but you can. I mean, and you'd think, actually, given how we know ornamental lilies aren't good for cats and not us, that daylilies would be the same. So it's really helpful that you've put all the edibles together.
Yes. I mean, I think the deal was that I had to find 100 different edible flowers and leaves to make up that directory. So, and there were a few that probably I haven't even included, but because I thought they might be too tricky to grow, or, if you've only got a small space. You can eat magnolia flowers, for example.
Yeah, they make a pickle, don't they?
Yeah.
There's lots of advice on pickling.
Yeah, there were some that I did leave out, but, I think 100 was the round number that we came up with.
Yeah, and I think my favourite inclusion is the dandelion, which I've been reading about dandelions all year, and we can all grow a dandelion, can't we?
Exactly. And then you've got something to do with them. Yeah. Let your lawn go to weed and eat it.
Well, I think what I love about this book is, even if it's somebody who cooks, it's an introduction and a way into loving flowers through eating them. So I think that's the triumph of this book that you've done, without a doubt.
Yes, I mean, I think it was sort of two-pronged in a way. I wanted to show people who grow lots of flowers anyway, because they love growing flowers, what they could do with them in a totally new way. And then people who aren't necessarily gardeners, but who are more into cooking, that they could just have a window box with a few things growing in it and use those as an ingredient in their kitchens.
Brilliant. Well, I think it's absolutely stunning. It's by Pimpernel Press, and it's A Floral Feast by Carolyn Dunster. And well done, Carolyn.
Thank you very much.
Lovely to chat to you, and hope to see you at a literary festival again soon that doesn't involve a huge screen.
Yes, exactly. Yes, with an audience as well. Yes.
Take care.
Thanks, Arthur.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks very much for listening to Grow Cook Eat Arrange. I hope you enjoyed that. I certainly did. Next week, I'm on my own actually, and I've set myself the task of, if I was sent to a desert island, what 12 bulbs would I want to take with me? And for me, this is really hard because I'm a complete autumn planting, spring flowering bulb addict. But I'm going to give you my 12 top desert island bulbs next week. So I'll be on my own, waxing lyrical. So see you then. You can find more information, photos and advice sheets on all the plants and recipes we talk about on this podcast by heading to the show notes or at sarahraven.com/podcast.